And it's even questionable whether if the Fed kind of pairs back and pivots, whether investors are going to buy into it. But we'll have to wait and see.
Welcome to Gold Silver Pros. Searching for the best precious metals deal? Shop with our trusted partner, 𝙂𝙀𝙊𝙍. Access special deals on silver, gold, and platinum through our website or call 307-264-9441.
Hey everybody, this is Rob Kientz with 𝙂𝙀𝙊𝙍𝙍. We're recording this on October 21st, 2022. I have a first-time special guest of the program is Mario Gnecco. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Robert. Nice to be speaking with you.
Yeah, thank you for joining the program. Your program has been a favorite of my viewers for a long time. We got lots of requests to have you on the show, and thought now in particular with what's going on globally would be a great time to get your perspective from across the pond. So that's kind of where I wanted to start. It just seems like a lot of stuff is going on for the UK right now. Can you give us a rundown of what you think is occurring and what the significance of that could be to, I guess, to the rest of us?
Yeah, I think we have to go back many decades, but I'll just go back to 2008 and 9. The that crisis was never really solved. There's no consequence of that crisis. Many people watched The Big Short, and they made a joke at the end. Oh, and all these bankers were jailed. They changed everything, bank reforms. Oh no, that didn't happen. And we've continued on the same system, and we had to bail out as taxpayers the system and ourselves, because a lot of people had a lot of big mortgages and they couldn't lose that. Politically in this country here in the UK, real estate is really important property, because we've become even more deindustrialized than the US, and we're like a consumer-based economy. So it's been growing and growing. We've had zero rates up until recently, end of 2021. Huge QE, not just after '08, but after in 2020 as well, rates back to zero. And then the Bank of England, like the Fed, dragged its feet, didn't raise rates. And it's just been a combination of crises after another, and incompetence from central bankers and politicians. And it's not doesn't surprise me, because like you have been saying, you told me before we started, you've been expecting this for 13 years. And so have I, because I've read history in the past and how all the symptoms have been accumulating. And yes, the mainstream is going to blame a mini budget by the new, well, she just resigned, but she's still there as prime minister. They're going to blame her mini budget but all it did, it just triggered an even bigger collapse of things. It already had started unraveling. Even in the US, you look at the 10-year yield, started 2022 at 1.5. This afternoon, London time, we just hit almost 435. And in the UK, it's even worse. And we don't have the major reserve currency here. So it's not as easy for us to keep inflating. And yeah, and that's where we are in the UK. And the other thing as well, things are getting really unraveling really quickly, because I'll make a video one morning and then an hour later someone resigns or the Bank of England backtracks. It's really hard to keep pace with things. Things that used to take months or even a year or two to change are changing in a matter of hours, and that's really unheard of.
Yeah, I've called this period the quickening, kind of after the Highlander movies, just because it seems like everything's moving faster than almost even we can process, and that's something we were talking about before we started recording. Things are just moving so fast. How does the average person keep up? It's almost like they're watching a tennis match. It's back and forth, and for the average person who doesn't do what we do every day in analyzing the markets and giving our opinions, how do they process what's going on? Can they even grasp, really, Mario, do you think, what's going on right now?
Unless they're watching us, or they have some knowledge of the market. And even then, I think it's really difficult. They're completely oblivious to what's happening under the surface. And I think a lot of people will be, will be shocked, I think, with what transpires. And I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but it's not going to be pretty. We saw here in the UK a few weeks ago, potentially many people who had private final salary or defined benefit pensions, they could have been wiped out and be left only with a small state pension. So, and I think maybe people are waking up now because that came out in the news, and that's why you look at the bullion dealers here in the UK. They're saying on their websites, like a notice, due to very high demand, it's going to take 3 to 5 business days to get your order through. So maybe people are waking up and seeing that they need a foot outside the system.
Yeah, I do think that's true. And we've been hearing reports. Of course, here in Texas, we had a billionaire's order 50 million in precious metals from Miles Franklin. Andy came on our show and was talking about that. And we've seen big orders come through, you know, the other dealers that we're affiliated with as well. And then somebody told me yesterday that I trust in the industry that one of the largest mints presidents had told him yesterday that the mints are now starting to order and pull metal off of COMEX because he can't get it from the refiners. So it appears as though, specifically with silver, so it appears as though with silver, we're really in a shortage condition where there's just not enough coming out from the mines. And it seems to be, you know, positive for silver going forward. What's your view on the precious metals going forward? Do you think, given all the geopolitical mess that we have going on in Europe and the economic issues I think most of the West is having, what's your view on where the precious metals will be?
Well, precious metals, they always outperform fiat currencies over the long term, so I'm not concerned about that. And they have done well for us here in the UK. I think we're up over 10% in terms of the gold price in sterling. You look at Japan, today the dollar reached another high, not all-time high, but it's like almost 152. I think the Japanese yen price of gold also is at almost all-time highs. And I think eventually the same thing will happen to the dollar. The reason the dollar is strong against gold, I think, is mainly because it's still the major reserve currency. So when the system is under pressure, the whole monetary system, the periphery will suffer first, and people will go to the dollar. But eventually, I just saw just before I came on that the Fed whisperer, and they call him Nick, I forgot his surname. He writes for the Wall Street Journal. He just came out and said that the Fed is thinking about moderating its hikes. So it was a hint, and you can see by the gold and silver price they've picked up, and it's probably because of the bond market, the 10-year yield, the treasury yields are rising very quickly, and it's not just in the US. Of course, in the UK, they spiked a couple of weeks ago, and they're still spiking. But we're seeing the German 10-year yield. I think it hit minus 85 basis points in 2020, and we're now at 2.5%, which is still historically low, I would say, because I remember working in the German government bond market, and the Bund future, the contract spec is a 6% 10-year Bund bond. And now we're still at 2.5. So I think there's still a long way to go. So this seems to be people getting out of fiat currencies and out of the bonds as well. And I don't think, I think unfortunately, not unfortunately, but a lot of people in the mainstream and even some in the alternative thought that bond yields would go back down to like 2 or 1. They might go down a little bit if the central banks pivot completely, but they're not going to go down to a lower level. It's going to be a matter of now higher highs and higher lows in bond yields for the next few decades. So that's how I see it. And it's even questionable whether if the Fed kind of pares back and pivots, whether investors are going to buy into it. But we'll have to wait and see.
Do you think the UK area is now stabilized given, the recent actions of the central bank, or do you think that the political class is still trying to figure out what's going on? And do you feel as though you're out of the woods at this point?
No, I don't. And that's the simple answer. And I think the Bank of England has been they've been dragging their feet. They first announced QT in the beginning of August, and they said we'll probably start in the beginning of September. And this was before the mini budget and everything, and they never did. Now they're saying, oh, we're going to start. They came out and said, oh, in December, we're going to announce the plans for our QT in the first quarter of 2023. So they keep dragging their feet. We have two measures of prices here. The CPI that came out at 10.1, but there's another one called the Retail Price Index, which measures council taxes, local taxes, and also mortgage servicing. That was like 12.6, and despite that, we're still Bank of England rate is still just over 2%. So yeah, I don't see them being able to raise rates too much, and I don't see political leadership. There is none. The thing is, the situation is so bad, and you know about that. The symptoms of over indebtedness, inflation, and political chaos and mayhem is one of the symptoms of hyperinflation, as we saw in France in the 1790s and Weimar Germany. So even though we're not getting assassinations in the UK, we might as well be getting them because everything is so out of whack. To think that Boris Johnson could come back as prime minister is just a joke. And even if we have general elections, the other side of the aisle, they're not any better. They'll probably be even worse. So we're not out of the woods, I don't think, personally.
What do you think it's meant for the BRICS nations to form their own currency, as Russia said that they were doing, their own challenger to the dollar, and all of the trade agreements that they've made? What does that say for the long-term viability of the dollar in your eyes?
Well, I don't think it means the end of the dollar. It just means that there will be less demand for dollars. And I get a lot of comments. Well, these BRIC countries, they're dictatorships. They're like third world countries. That may be so, but if they don't use the dollar to buy their imports, they're going to be using something else. And even if they are dictatorships or not as developed or advanced, they're still not going to, they're going to decrease the amount of dollars they use. And I think in the past, countries have tried to do that, like Iraq and Libya, and we know what happened to them. But now the BRICS are becoming, they are powerful nations, and it's very hard, I think, for the West to just punish the BRICS. And we've seen recently that even Saudi Arabia, according to I think the South African president, said that they're thinking of joining. So yeah, the dollar will still be around, just like the pound still around after being the reserve currency in the 19th century in the run up to World War I, but it's a lot weaker and not as significant. And I think the same will be for the dollar. But what it will mean for Americans is that everything's going to be more expensive, the things that they need to survive on. And it could be a good thing in the long term, a blessing in disguise. It means that Americans will have to start producing things and exporting them to earn their way in the world, because with the reserve currency, they've had that term, the exorbitant privilege, just to print the money and buy whatever they want, while other people have had to earn their way.
Yeah, that's a good point you bring out about the U.S. Whoever has a dominant reserve currency tends to have basically pricing power in the market and eventually moves to a more service-based economy. There have been some whispers of bringing manufacturing in particular back to the United States and political circles, even in the liberal parties, are beginning to recognize that that would support the dollar a lot more than what's going on. So I think they haven't typically come across as being the wisest of the two political classes fiscally, but I think even they're starting to get it just a little bit. So I do think we're going to go through some pain here in the U.S. before that happens, certainly, as we unwind, this beast that we have created with the system. And at the end of the day, given all the pain that's going on across the world, I ultimately think Americans are going to take the most, just because we're going to lose the benefits that we had with that dollar. And Mari, you can start to see this around. You can start to see businesses failing. You can start to see infrastructure aging. It reminds me of when I read about the fall of Rome and how that just gradually occurred, how our infrastructure started failing. The values of society had changed quite a bit. It wasn't quite as cohesive. I feel as though that's what's going on in America right now. I don't know how you feel out there, but I suppose Europe is probably going through much of the same thing as well that we are.
Yeah, I think Europe has been a much longer decline. I would say since World War One. It's been unfortunate. But yeah, I haven't been to the US in a while, but I've noticed I read about it a lot and I see videos about the infrastructure. And actually, in the EU, I'm not in the EU anymore, being in the UK, but I went to Madeira, which is a Portuguese island off the Morocco in the Atlantic. But even there, the infrastructure was great. 180 tunnels, really good motorways or highways. And I spoke, one of the guys who drove us around said, well, it's been the EU that has given Portugal all the money to build this infrastructure for the last 30 years. So there has been some of that here. And I think the US, unfortunately, has been too focused on fighting wars, and all the trillions that should have gone into infrastructure have been wasted in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. And I guess the military industrial complex has benefited from it, but not the American public.
What are your thoughts on the middle class? I know your recent comments have been the middle class basically is eroding away, and I think that's what a lot of us feel. But you mentioned there could be good things on the other side of this when we go through the financial reset. Do you suspect that the middle class will be making a comeback after we get through all of this mess, or do you have a view on that?
Yeah, definitely. They should make a comeback, but it's not going to be overnight. And I think the closing of the gold window in 1971 had a big impact on that. And yeah, because it diluted average workers' salaries, and it still does. It's helped just the top 1 or 10%, really. Even the Federal Reserve has really good data on that, on the distribution of wealth in the US. And you look at 1989, I think it goes as far back as 89. The top 1%, they have a lot more wealth now than they did then. And the bottom 90 is stuck just below 4 or 5%. And but yeah, I think yeah, things look bad right now, but I think the way things are turning, eventually it can only get better. I'm not a pessimist. I just try to see how things are. And but the middle class will have to they'll have to work hard, but hopefully they'll have all the better jobs will come back to the US, and it might, because if the dollar goes down a lot, you could see some foreign investment coming in, and yeah, making it worthwhile for people to start building factories and other things in the US.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But last question I want to ask you is the role of energy. Energy's gotten quite a bit more expensive, and it seems as though we're kind of going back to almost to regional energy markets, given the geopolitical scene going on right now. At least the sanctions have sort of created a wall between East and West. What's your view on energy going forward? Do you think there's a temporary phenomenon where energy prices are going to be up due to geopolitical, or what's your view on energy going forward, just in general? How much of a role do you think that's going to play in the world economies?
Well, it's really important energy, of course, because the economies can't run without energy. Here in the UK, I think a big part of the crisis, aside from the Ukraine, has been this move towards this zero carbon, net zero, and this has been part of this what they call here the Climate Change Act, which was passed in the middle of the '08 crisis, and I don't think many people noticed it, and and that's led to the government subsidizing all these alternative energy sources that are very inefficient and expensive. And yeah, so I think energy is going to be very important going forward. My hope is that we abandon all this climate change agenda, even though it's very strong right now, and go back more, to the UK. Britain is sitting on a lot of coal. Why can't we use that? And I think recently in Parliament, they actually voted through a law to allow fracking in the UK, which is a good start. And in the US, it's really mixed as well. But unfortunately, I think that Inflation Reduction Act, that was like a green energy, kind of like our Climate Change Act in from '08 in disguise. So I don't think that's very good. The US should be totally energy independent. I don't know if you heard of Lindsey Williams. He talks about how when he worked in Alaska as a chaplain for an big oil company, Atlantic Richfield, they found the biggest oil fields in the North Slope of Alaska, but it hasn't been touched for 50 years. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe now the US could tap that. Who knows?
The climate change agenda has been an interesting one. Certainly people want, better climate, better environment. A lot of that research, I think, has come under fire. I don't believe I've ever believed that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas personally. So I don't believe that part of the narrative, but it certainly seems to give a lot of power to the political class to shape the energy policy going forward. And I do think that especially like you said, in the US, we have tons of energy. We have natural gas. We have plenty of shales that we can frack from. We have oil, tons of it. We have coal for energy. We also have thorium, if that ever gets developed as an alternative to uranium. So I certainly think that we have the capability of being energy independent, but I think it's going to maybe take a crisis to get us there, because all of the plans, I think, the different political classes around the world for this climate change agenda all seem good on paper until you actually run them. And we see what's happened in Germany when they turned down their nuclear and then they ran into issues, with Russia and natural gas. That looks like it could potentially be a horrible situation going into the winter. So for me, the energy question is also a really big one. And I do think that we need to go back to looking at more realistic alternatives to the energy situation than what the political class has now. But it may take a crisis to get there. And hopefully the crisis is not too bad in Europe, and hopefully people come to their senses. Maybe Germany will use some coal this winter, because I know they're sitting on some of it as well. Hopefully that situation gets resolved. But if it doesn't, Mario, what do you think Europe is going to look like on the other side of this winter if they don't figure out the energy situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's going to be a deep recession, I think, no matter what happens, because I think it's a bit late now to solve the problem, and maybe the public will get so angry that the politicians are going to have to do a U-turn. That's the hope that I have here in the UK as well. It's not going to be any different than on the continent. And I think the UK, for example, we haven't stored that much natural gas. So I think we only have 3 to 5% stored for winter, which isn't good. And they're even talking about blackouts like in January and February at night, a few hours, which is something that shouldn't really be happening.
Yeah. Mario, thank you so much for coming on the program. I'd love to have you on again, but appreciate your perspective from across the pond.
You're welcome, and thanks for having me on your channel.
Absolutely.